Of insight about me. So I've been working in PR for about 10 years roughly. I studied PR at Nottingham Trent University a while ago now. Absolutely love it. It's such an ever-changing industry, you know, there's a lot to keep on top of. So I've been at Annika for it's only about 10 months now, I think, which has flown by. And essentially I'm responsible for the PR and content team here. We're growing, which is great. We have a really big mixture of B2B and B2C clients. And obviously we do everything from traditional PR to digital and sort of the link building strategy side. And then we also look at kind of the SEO side from an optimization point of view as well. So we cover quite a lot of different areas. And like I say, the kind of team's growing and we're looking at ways to integrate the teams a lot better. If you would have seen Anne's webinar, I think it would have been a couple of Fridays ago now, where she covered off all the different channels and all the services that we offer. It kind of went into a little bit of detail there about how we're looking to work together more integrated as teams. So I'm going to jump in then. So obviously, if for those that kind of don't know much about Annika, I imagine you might know a little bit. Obviously, you're here. But yeah, we've got 26 staff, over 46 clients at the moment, and we've been going for quite some time now. So obviously established in 2007. And we recently won a few paid media awards as well, which is great. So these are obviously kind of the key services that we offer. So obviously you've got kind of the analytics, creative, paid media, PR and content, which obviously I'm here for, SEO, social media and training. So we cover lots of different areas, and whatever your brief, we mix and match obviously services to best suit your needs. So what will we cover today? This is a sort of a brief overview. So we're going to talk through the key steps to take in order to develop an effective PR campaign for a client or your business. I've done it from sort of both angles. So whether you're working in an agency or, you know, you're in an in-house PR position, or maybe you're in a more general in-house marketing position, or a student, like obviously from the poll, we know there's a mixture of you there. So this should cover all bases hopefully and give you like sort of a really kind of broad foundation as to kind of where to get started in terms of how to determine what you need to do. So key areas we're going to cover, understanding and establishing objectives, so what the KPIs are. There's the research stage, obviously really important, determining the strategy, deciding what tactics we should actually use, looking at target audiences and target media, obviously making sure these two things are right, have a really big impact on whether it's going to be successful. Looking at ideas as well, what makes a credible PR story and what types of sort of coverage would you expect to gain from different types of businesses and products. The developing of media materials, and finally, although sort of this is about planning ahead, it's I am going to look a little bit at measurement and ROI just to give you an understanding of how we would measure it internally. Okay, great. So firstly, looking at objectives and KPIs. So establishing objectives, obviously in order to build an effective PR campaign, we must determine what it needs to achieve, first of all. So kind of different examples of this is it to build brand awareness? Is it to increase sales, support SEO strategies, or promote a new product or service? And ultimately, if it's a client, why have they approached us for help? So as an agency, we need to understand what the overarching objectives are so we can ensure the client is happy and we meet their expectations from the outset. But this applies to in-house roles too, just ensuring that outputs are aligned with key stakeholders and business owners. And obviously, if it's your own business as well, what you want to achieve. So looking at different objective examples, and obviously this varies a lot based on different businesses and different sectors. You know, if the business is a lot more corporate, there tends to be a different set of KPIs. But for example, B2C, so obviously business to consumer, some examples of objectives we're given. So product sales, obviously sales being an absolute, number one. Building brand awareness, of course. Building brand loyalty, creating those ambassadors that keep coming back to the website and obviously building that retention. Generating high quality traffic, getting people on the website is really important. Improve domain authority. Obviously, that will then directly affect your SEO in a positive light. Launch new products. So if you've got, a new range, especially for B2C, that is obviously a big area. And improve SEO as well. And then just looking at B2B, so obviously examples could be that you want to generate leads, you might want to improve your brand reputation, build that, I've put credibility on there, but building that trust and credibility in the sector that to show that you know what you're talking about. Awards are really important, I would say, in B2B businesses. And B2C, generate high quality traffic again, improve domain authority, and then we've got a few crossovers there, so improving SEO visibility as well. So there's quite a lot of crossover in terms of those key kind of objectives there, but I think probably the main difference is obviously generating leads and actual sales, because you need to get the leads on the site initially. So different ways to measure these kind of different objectives. These are just some examples of kind of different kind of KPIs you could set against your business, or ones that client approach us with, or we might set them for a client. So obviously percentage increase in sales year on year, some number of pieces of coverage secured, reach and circulation of that coverage, how many times has it been shared on social media, is there a percentage increase in traffic to the website, and what are the returning visitor stats look like? Obviously measuring backlinks as well, just making sure we're gaining as many backlinks through our PR activity as possible. And obviously, domain authority rating improves, so you could set a target for that. So for example, I've put there, you can improve it by 10. And then B2B, again, similar. So it could be percentage increase in leads year on year, whether that's contact form submissions on your website. Again, the number of pieces secured, an increase in organic traffic, increased visibility in Google. So obviously looking at those keyword rankings and making sure that people can find, your web pages based on their searches. Awards won or shortlisted, and then kind of the number of thought leadership coverage pieces secured. So we do a lot of interview based sort of commentary, reactive opportunities with our B2B clients, because obviously there's a lot going on in news and things. So a lot of the KPIs tend to be around how many interview opportunities we've secured. And then obviously reputation is really important. So we can measure this by sentiment. So our media monitoring platform essentially shows us whether they're kind of positive or negative feedback, or how people are talking about the company itself. So we can kind of find the sources of that if it's negative and try and, turn that around. And that's where kind of crisis comms and things plays quite a big part. Okay, so once we've established all of the KPIs and sort of objectives that we want to achieve, obviously that's the key first stage, we can then look to the research stage, whether, that's looking at the business, the industry, trends and competitors as well. So getting to know the business and sector. So as I said, in order to build a strong PR campaign and begin generating those ideas, we have to understand what the business and brand are all about. Obviously, it's formed based on your own research, discussions internally, and with different departments. I always think if you're in an in-house comms position, in my experience, just there's a saying where you just got to have a seat at every table, because it's just really important to know exactly what's going on across the business. And a lot of the time, different departments don't know what makes PR or what is worthy of a story. So sometimes people don't automatically think to communicate that down, to a comms manager, for example. So it's just worth getting your kind of, involved in as many meetings and things as you can. But obviously, as an agency, we tend to know a lot of the answers to these questions when we first start speaking to a potential client, because we do a pitch process. And so we have a relatively good understanding early on. These are just some key questions that you can ask yourself in relation to your business, or, the business you're working for. So key things such as, who are their target audience? What locations do they operate in? Are they B2B or B2C? Who are their key competitors? Is there anything they dislike about what the competitors are doing, or like what the competitors are doing? Because then you can use them as a reference point. What are the products and services they're looking to promote? If they offer a service, who do they work with? Any key clients or partnerships? what are their USPs, what sets them apart, and obviously if they've done any PR before, if they have, was it, you know, what worked, what didn't work. We need to kind of review why, you know, things went the way they did, essentially. So again, as an agency, we use a bit of an auditing process to find a lot of these questions out as well. We tend to conduct an audit at the beginning of a client working with us, just to make sure we've got a real in-depth understanding of where they sit in the market in regards to sort of PR coverage, and where their content, you know, where it needs improvement, and obviously how it compares to their competitors. So we've got a number of tools we use to do this, but kind of key areas we'd look at within the audit, you know, is how visible are they in Google? So what pages do they appear on for kind of key search terms in relation to their business or products? So for example, a very easy example here, but if you search hairdryers, are they on the first page? So Dyson, for example, would they come up on the first page, which I imagine they do? How much media coverage have they had in the last year? And if so, what key topics were covered? What were the circulation figures like? You know, what types of publications were they included in? How much media exposure do their competitors have? So, for example, one of the tools we use shows all the key journalists that have featured that competitor over a period of time. So we can do research into their competitor, and then we can look at how we can utilize those relationships or build relationships with those journalists to leverage, you know, the people that are focused on that industry and writing about the competitors. Yeah, we can review domain authority. Obviously, that's really important, and backlinks. So we can look at their backlink profile and see where kind of their links have been coming from until now, and again for competitors. And then looking at what type of content is already available as well. A lot of the time, you know, our clients tend to have a lot of content on the site already, like whether that's blog posts or really in-depth kind of reports or guides. And it's just looking at how we can repurpose that, you know, to save time and get some quick wins. What are the key trends dominating the industry? Again, the Google Trends, is a really great tool for this. You've probably heard of it already, but I will mention it later on as well. Okay, so again, getting to know the industry and sector is incredibly important. This is one of our clients, actually, Floorstock. They're essentially a flooring company that sells to trade. They are B2C to some extent, but their main target audience is schools, you know, tradespeople, and for example, like big office refurbishments. But it's really important to get under the skin of kind of what their kind of industry as a whole is doing. So we can look at industry publications which are relevant to kind of the flooring and trade industry. What are they talking about? What are they writing about? Have they got any associations or memberships? You know, do they have any kind of key accreditations? For example, Floorstock, they do a lot of training, so they're part of a lot of training sort of memberships in the industry. So it's just understanding and getting under the skin of what they do. Looking at social media channels, which is obviously quite an obvious one, making sure you know what they're kind of up to. Looking at research, market research reports, and then industry events as well. What are the events that they're going to be exhibiting at? What, you know, where are their competitors being seen? And what are kind of the other potential sort of, there could be other brands there that you didn't think were a competitor, for example. Okay, so just looking at Google Alerts, again, this goes back to kind of industry. Google Alerts is really great for a number of things. One, but I tend to use it a lot more for sort of industry-based kind of trend knowledge. So for example, if we're working with the flooring company Floorstock, for example, I would, you know, have an alert set up for interior trends just to make sure we're jumping on any kind of new news that's coming through. And again, we've got a really specialist scientific client. So kind of an alert there would be to do with genetics. So it's just a really good way of kind of tracking what's generally being said about that sector. And Harrow, so help a reporter out. This is a free service that you can sign up for. I highly recommend it. Essentially, you just put your email in on their website and they will send you a breakdown of journalist requests. So anything journalists are looking for in terms of interviews, it might be products or samples, for example. So it's a really good way of understanding what journalists are talking about and what they're looking for. So there's an example here. It's a little bit tiny for me to see, but yeah, so if you're an expert in photography, you might observe the differences between smartphone and cameras, and kindly explain in detail why you think which one is better. So it's just asking for like really industry insight, and it gives you the direct contact as well. So it's a really good way of gaining coverage and finding opportunities. So competitors, obviously this is key. What can we learn from them? Looking at how competitors are being spoken about in the media and what types of press releases or content they're sending out, it gives us a really great understanding and opportunity to find the gaps in your own strategy, and also come up with ideas of things that you can be talking about as well. So again, I won't read through all these in detail. It's very similar, but what key topics are they talking about? What conversations can we join in with? Audi's a really good example of that, with obviously the Colin the Caterpillar situation that happened on social media, and I think they're still continuing with it by doing like the London Marathon dressed as the caterpillar, which is great. But it's just an example of how you shouldn't necessarily shy away from competitors. You can potentially utilize them to kind of have a bit of a conversation online. Also, what changes are happening in their business? Are they launching new products? Have they found a gap in the market that you've missed as well that you could be leveraging? So yeah, just some key things to look out for there. So this is just one of the tools that we use to monitor competitors. There are various other options out there. Brandwatch is another one we've been using here at Anika as well, which I would also recommend. But Meltwater's up until recently something we've been using as well. I've just kind of given you an example here of a keyword search that I've put in. So I've used Urban Outfitters, obviously a very well-known kind of B2C brand. And it just brings up here, it shows you how many mentions they've had in the month, what their trends are like in terms of what topics have been spoken about, and it brings up all of the different pieces of coverage where they've been mentioned in the last year. And I would highly recommend this because it gives you so much insight and areas that you can steal, well, not steal, that's probably the wrong word, but you can get ideas from competitors essentially. And you can see along this bar here, there's a lot of in-depth analysis in this tool. So like authors, we've got here, so like I mentioned, it will tell you who's actually published the articles that they're showing you, so you can get in contact with them, build those relationships. Again, so this is an example from a backlinks point of view. So we use Ahrefs. We've got a lot of other tools here as well, like SEO Monitor. But this Ahrefs is a really good tool to look at the backlink profile. So obviously ASOS would be a competitor to Urban Outfitters. So I've used them as an example. And this is just an idea of kind of the top backlinks they've achieved in the last I think this was probably a month period or so. But basically these are the kind of highest domain rating sort of links that they've achieved in X amount of time. But again, it just gives you an idea of the different kind of articles they've been featured in. So again, there's one here about wedding attire. Obviously, wedding season's approaching, so is there anything we can do with that from a PR point of view for our client? So it's just really good at generating ideas. So also, we just need to think as well, just based on all of that we've done up until this point, have our objectives actually changed? It's really important just to stop and think once you've done that research and work out whether, the objectives and the KPIs are realistic, whether you think they're actually in line with what the sort of they should be trying to sort of achieve. So as an agency, we need to understand and just make sure that we, once we've completed the audit stage, we'll recommend a sort of potentially a new set of KPIs or objectives based on our findings, which are a bit more realistic or in line with what they want to achieve. So determining the strategy, obviously one of the key kind of points in this. So as an agency, again, there's some really key considerations we've got to take on board. So for example, a large PR stunt may take months to organise. So however, a press release about a new product launch might be quicker and have a similar result. So we need to look at what kind of the quick wins are as well. And also these kind of key considerations, how much is the client paid in terms of time? What strategies are going to get the quickest results? How much experience do we have in the sector? Do we need to build in extra time to build relationships with journalists in those areas? How can the strategy complement other channels? So obviously from an integrated agency point of view, with Annika, you know, we want to make sure that campaigns complement other areas of the business and other channels we're working with. So it's just important that it bears those in mind. And how do we ensure KPIs are met and the client is happy with results, essentially? So I guess this comes back to kind of, so what strategies are we going to use? This breaks down sort of a little bit of the differences between traditional and digital PR methods when you're making decisions about what the best kind of route to go down is. So obviously traditional tends to be effective from more of a brand awareness point of view in a specific sector, or very sort of measured or niche, whilst digital PR has a lot of benefits which support SEO, obviously, which it directly affects a lot of other areas of the business as well. So obviously increasing traffic, and it's overall a lot easier to measure and track, obviously being online. So traditional PR, I would say, sort of covers, it's mostly online sort of print coverage. It looks at events management and sponsorships that could be beneficial. It also looks at crisis communication as well. It's a real kind of thought leadership focus, focusing on key members of the business and just making sure they're kind of heard and spoken about. It tends to be a lot more editorial content and columns in print publications, and obviously interviews and feature articles. And then digital PR tends to lend itself more to sort of the link building strategy side, because it can be very data led. The agenda tends to be quite different. We can look at influencer partnerships, creating those ambassadors like we've spoken about, and sort of in building those sort of SEO tactics as part of what we're doing. So at Annika, we're very integrated with the SEO team. So the PR and content team work closely with Brad, who you would have seen on a webinar, who looks after the SEO team. But essentially, we're looking at ways that we can help complement each other even more, with sort of our clients ongoing and sort of merging the services. So we can also look at sort of online reputation management as well. Online, obviously, press releases and newsrooms, blogger outreach and guest blogging is important. Online communities and forums as well. Don't forget, there's things like Reddit that can actually generate a lot of traffic and a lot of noise. So it's not to be kind of just shied away from. Obviously, podcasts and webinars, a great way as well. And content marketing plays a huge part as well, because obviously if we're looking at a link building strategy, we would tend to focus on creating a really large piece of content to go on the website of the client or business we're working with. So for example, a really large in-depth report. It could be like figures around like working from home in different areas. So for example, people tend to work remotely more in Nottingham than they do in Lincoln. And once you've got all that information on your website as the key point of source, kind of key area to refer back to, it opens up opportunities for link building, because you can outreach to all the regional publications, all the different segments of data, but they want to refer back to the original source of data. So that's where you try and kind of inbuild those links. So this is a really good example. So Tri-Fibre is a company that we've worked with, and essentially this was a digital PR campaign we ran with them. It was obviously very much a data-led campaign in reference to link building and kind of really building their domain authority in high-level publications. So here, I think the one on the left is actually The Guardian, but it doesn't show it. And obviously on the right, Board Panda is a really big viral website. What they do is essentially they sell flight cases, so everything to protect things when you're traveling, essentially. If you imagine the big sort of cases for bands that they kind of lug around, that's the sort of products that they offer in terms of flight cases. So we ran this big campaign about the different airlines, and which airlines are more likely to damage your luggage, essentially. But obviously in doing that, we not only did we create like a really viral PR story, because it's something people, want to know, based on our research, but we also indirectly selling those flight cases as well, because it's obviously saying, if you've got a really good like flight case, it wouldn't happen regardless. So that's just an example of how an idea can really generate into a large amount of coverage. Okay, so next, we'd be looking at sort of target media. Obviously, making sure you target the right people in the right places is key, and at the right time as well. So obviously identifying target media audiences, we need to identify who we send our news to. We've got to figure out where the target audience are consuming content. So which list we send to will depend on the type of story we want to publish ultimately. So these are just some examples of different types of sectors and publications, and how we would break it down. So I would look at sort of national news, and that's obviously BBC, The Guardian, etc. Looking at consumer magazines as well, people like Glamour, House and Garden. And then we've got like the regional newspapers, the more local papers. One thing I would say about the local papers as of recently, because there are a lot of shortages in terms of editors and journalists, they're becoming increasingly more difficult to leverage, sort of gain coverage in. And that's partly because they're under a lot of pressure from an advertising point of view. And it's just sort of something I've become aware of more and more in the last few years, I would say. So it's just important to know that it's best to have direct conversations with the journalists rather than just sending them a press release, because a lot of the time they might ask you to pay for it and you don't want to waste your time. Then obviously we've got broadcast TV and radio, and then there's sort of sector specific trade publications. So for example, if we're working with a HR software company, we'd look at HR news. And then there's the business news, obviously those kind of specific business led publications for different types of company news. So whether that's like we've got a new person joining the team, or we're expanding into a new country, or we're opened a new office, that sort of thing. That would obviously fit really well into that business news kind of target list. So how would we actually create media lists? So obviously once we've established the type of sectors, we need to kind of actually create those kind of contact lists. And this is how we would go about doing it. So we essentially subscribe to a really large PR database. There's absolutely loads of these available to you. Don't get me wrong that you have to pay for them. I don't think there's one that's free. And that's partly obviously because there's a lot of GDPR regulations around it. It's holding on to a lot of contact information. So it will be a subscription, but we use one called Cision actually as our main database. But essentially they contain a really wide number of kind of media contacts, everything from their phone number, email address, sometimes their actual home address. But they also include some really interesting information about the types of stories they publish and the types of topics they cover as well. So this is Cision, which is just mentioned to you. So this is the new platform we've actually just started working with, which is really great. I'd highly recommend that. A new sort of, we've got the big kind of cloud version, which is their new platform. And this is just an example of how you would look for those people. So obviously this is a food editor at the New York Post as an example, but it shows how you can really filter down and find the right people in the right places. It actually says here, it breaks it down and shows you about her career and everything. So you can really get an understanding if she's been at a different publication at the beginning of her career, then, you've got, that kind of background history. So you've got something to talk to them about. Okay, so once you've established all of that, so we've got our media list, we know who we want to talk to, we need to ultimately decide what makes an actual story, what is going to get interest, what is going to get pick up from journalists. It's a very crowded marketplace right now in terms of PR, I would say, and especially in some certain industries and sectors, key national days play a huge part. And for example, International Women's Day, you would have seen so much content go out on there, and it's so competitive. So it's really important to get ahead of it. So these are some kind of different examples of business-led news. So if you're a B2B type brand or business, these are some of the key areas that I would be be covering in terms of news. So obviously, I've mentioned new team members, expansion into new countries, award wins. Have you been shortlisted or won any awards? New client or business announcements. From an Annika point of view, if we were to start working with a really, a new big client, then it's something we would announce from a press point of view. Industry commentary pieces about trending topics, and CSR. So obviously, are they doing anything from a charity fundraising point of view? Have they chosen a charity of the year? So for example, Annika, we've actually just chosen a charity to work with. And then event promotion pre and post. So I would say with B2B businesses, there tends to be quite a lot of events, so things like trade shows and expos, etc. Or at least now there is more and more after COVID. But it's just making sure so you shout about those before and after, the successes of them, etc. And then looking at product focused PR, so obviously this is more B2C orientated, just to kind of give more of an insight about the differences between the two. Obviously, if it's very product orientated, I would recommend still doing sort of gifting and samples. With product sort of PR, I would say it's changed quite a lot in the last few years. So I've worked at kind of a number of different brands. So people like Pretty Polly, I was doing the PR for them. Obviously, like quite a well-known like hosiery brand in Nottingham, and also Oh Dear. So I worked at Oh Dear for about nearly 4 years, doing their PR with subscription boxes, and they're essentially greeting cards. And subscription based company with stationery, and they cover loads of different gifting as well. But back in those days, well, I say in those days, not that long ago, I would be going to London frequently, doing what's called desk sides, essentially taking all the product to show the journalists. In London, obviously, there's the big publishing houses which tend to house a lot of the different glossy magazines, publications. So I would be going there and actually physically showing them the products. But it has changed quite significantly since then. It's all online, obviously, since COVID, and a lot of those journalists don't work in those offices anymore. So I'd still recommend gifting and samples, obviously sending to their address if they're kind enough to give it to you. And then product placement as well. So just making sure that you can partner with influencers, for example, making sure that you get, if it's, I don't know, like a sofa company you're working for, looking at whether the influencers need a new sofa because they've just moved house. Top 10 style articles as well. So on the right hand side here is a really good example. This is from Glamour magazine. I've used Dyson again as an example for some reason, but essentially it's a really good like product breakdown in terms of like a top 10 best hair dryers. So it's just looking at how you can get ahead of those articles that are published. They tend to be quite frequent with things like this, especially around the seasons, obviously with the gift guides and things like Christmas. But you can tend to get ahead of it and just making sure you're gifting it in advance, and sending that journalist all the information they need. Obviously, it tends to be a lot more social media focused as well, product-based PR, because people are endorsing things on social media. So on Instagram, there'll be like unboxing things, for example, that have been delivered, new product launch press releases, and also innovation as well is really important. Obviously, again, using Dyson as an example, they're absolutely top of their game in terms of their industry with innovation. So it's just making sure that those sort of new technologies are really spoken about in detail for, you target TechCrunch for that. So it just opens up a lot of doors. Again, I mentioned national days. This is obviously last month, and an example of all the different kind of key days that go on. Don't get me wrong, a lot of them I probably would focus on for social media rather than a PR point of view, but it's still really important to be aware of them. I mentioned International Women's Day, obviously that's huge. And Women's History Month, if you're working for, a brand that's, a business that's in history related in some capacity, or a museum, for example, that could be a really good opportunity. And even things like Recycling Day, if you're pushing a big sustainability sort of ethos in the business, is there room to shout about something around Recycling Day? Could you organise a big litter pick or something for the company to go out and do, which again would be like a nice regional story essentially. Okay, so looking at kind of what the media materials that you need to actually make this happen, obviously it's important to prep all of this beforehand. So obviously whilst planning a campaign, we need to decide what type of media materials and content we need to pitch. So these are just some examples. Again, it would vary entirely on the business you're working for, but press releases are obviously probably the top one that everyone uses. You know, that's those statements to the media. So we would send them out via our platform, so Cision or Meltwater. We call it issuing essentially. So we'd issue it to press. And then case studies as well. Have you got any kind of detailed case studies that could be really beneficial to back up some of your kind of claims? Product descriptions and imagery, especially from a product-led PR point of view, this is so important. I would say, you know, products, images, high quality with white backgrounds are absolutely sort of paramount in terms of making sure they get featured. Obviously in like the high end sort of glossy magazines, a lot of the roundups tend to use those kind of key images. So it's just important to make sure you've got a bank of those. It's the worst case scenario when a journalist asks you for it and they've got a deadline by the end of the day and it's just something that you can't get sorted, so you miss the opportunity essentially. Product samples, obviously gifting, white papers and in-depth reports. You know, is there any like really good analysis that you've already got? And also, is that something you should build upon? You know, look at creating infographics, photography and videos. They're so important. That's what really can set you apart in terms of getting a story in a publication versus somebody else, because it really adds value for them as well, and it saves them a job essentially. Media kits. So we would actually, depending on the client, create a media kit. So that could be profiles of key people in the business, you know, bios and kind of with their image, you know, their headshot, general information about the company. Or from a product point of view, another example of that is kind of doing a media kit for a new product launch. So for example, we've just worked with a client to launch their spring summer range of garden furniture. So I would have recommended to the team that we essentially create one of those media kits breaking down all the different product types in detail with pricing and images, etc. Essentially, the more you can give journalists, the better, and the more likely they are to feature it essentially. So that leads us to sort of, obviously we've gone over kind of how you would go about kind of researching and planning and getting all those media materials in place to begin sort of a strategy. But it's important, I thought, for me to kind of give you examples of how we'd actually measure and report on how, you know, whether it's a winning strategy or not, essentially. So obviously throughout the campaign, we monitor all coverage as it comes in live. We're alerted by a media monitoring system who watches for brand mentions in keywords we've asked it to track. This essentially shows us where it's been published, the headline, how many people it's reached, and whether it's, you know, positive or negative. So it's really important for us to get ahead of it and know what's being said about this brand, because essentially we're responsible for ensuring that we alert them to anything negative quickly and we try and resolve that. Or, you know, we alert them to the good news that, you know, they've been featured or mentioned in a really positive light. But it's then important for them to, you know that information up front, so then you can publish it on social media, you know, send it out across the business itself from an internal comms point of view. So this is Meltwater again, and it just shows you kind of some of the media alerts and how they're shown in the platform. So obviously this is Annika I've used as an example, and it was kind of, I think this, I've set it as the last 90 days, and this just shows you how it appears, and we can see like where Annika's been mentioned. It says on the right hand side what the sentiment is. Often, if they can't really gauge whether it's positive or negative, they just put neutral. But for the most part, neutral is a good thing. And then on the left-hand side, you can see there the reach. So it says here, you know, for this particular event that we were featured, it's 211,000 in reach. And the one below there is just over 21,000 as well. Okay, so this is an example PR report as well. We've used Coverage Book for some time now, just to illustrate to clients sort of how it is essentially a really great tool that compiles all of your sort of you can put in like a list of links and it will automatically generate for you. It will pull in all of like the clippings. So a while ago we used to have to really individually clip, on like screenshot and use Paint to pull clippings in together and save them manually in a folder. But Coverage Book I'd highly recommend, actually, and I don't think it's too pricey for the amount of time it saves. It's a huge time saver. And essentially it actually calculates all of these measurements for you. So for example, it's got there sort of the number of pieces of coverage. It's very small for me, so I'm going to have to lean in. Estimated coverage views alongside their social shares, which obviously we've mentioned. It's got revenue in there as well, so it can link to different analytics and things like that. There are integrations there available, so you can actually pull in a lot more data from referrals. And yeah, this is just an example of something we use. Obviously there's loads of different ways to report, and you can do it manually, obviously, if you don't have the luxury of a sort of a Coverage Book system or platform, but it is something that I would recommend for sure. And I think that has brought us to the end of it. I think I whizzed through that quite quickly, actually.
Oh, I loved it, Katie. You've got a couple of questions. Should we go for those?
Yeah.
So, do you have an example of a media kit? Would you assemble it as a PDF, or is it better as a shareable zip file you'd share with a journalist?
I would usually, obviously it's personal preference, to be honest with you. Journalists aren't super fussy. I've always done it as a PDF. I think it's just nice to attach it to an email essentially. And journalists just really appreciate the more information you can give them, the better, essentially, because they're so busy and journalists are so stretched right now. And there's a lot less editors than there used to be, and ironically there's more PR people now, because a lot of the PR people are doing all the content and all the copy for the journalist to publish. So yeah, the more you can give them, the better. Either way is absolutely fine. But I would just usually do a PDF.
I think from my experiences, it's always like get your mindset, thinking what does a journalist need and what will get it kind of article ready as quickly as possible as well. So anything to kind of edge it along, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I did get one question, just generally, what's your favorite PR campaign that you've ever done? Can't get my words out, sorry.
Oh God, that's a really difficult one.
I know.
I think obviously it's because it's on the brain, so I'm sorry I'm using the same example, but the Tri-Fiber one is a really good example that I put in within the, it's a good example of just finding a really good hook which is relevant to obviously the audience from a national news point of view. If you can incorporate big names within your coverage. So for example, that one obviously had like Ryanair, and Ryanair was the one that came out the worst, I think, which I don't think we'll all be that surprised about. But anything that includes big corporate names is more likely to get national coverage, 100%. So if you can try and associate yourself with big names in some capacity, it's more likely to get picked up for sure. That's probably one of my favourites.
Just to share, so hopefully this will come on your screen. Obviously Katie's worked really hard on this webinar, and just as a thank you, for any of you can leave a review, we'd be really grateful. It's actually Katie's first webinar, isn't it, as well?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. Obviously a little bit nerve-wracking, but you've been a nice bunch.
There's another question. Sorry.
Okay.
If you had a small budget and were trying for PR for the first time, what would you start with?
Yeah, so with this, in my first PR job, I had such a minimal budget. I was working for a startup essentially, and we had to be really resourceful about how we were going to do it. So it was making decisions about what to invest in, what not to. I would say the absolute number one thing I would spend money on is getting the contact information, because without that, without the journalist information, it's quite difficult. I mean, that being said, LinkedIn's a great tool now. You could potentially use LinkedIn to do a lot of digging. If you have time, it's all about time versus money, really. You can do a lot of digging online, find journalists, try and find their contact details in some capacity, whether that's via LinkedIn or something like that. But essentially, I would just start really basic with doing, a company press release, for example. Send it out over email, so you don't need sort of a tool to send it out as such. Set up Google alerts, which are entirely free, to track your brand mentions, rather than investing in an expensive tool. But obviously, when you start doing that on a bigger scale and things, the amount of time versus money is where you start to weigh it up. But there's a fair amount that you can do on a limited budget, for sure.
Okay. Just to let you all know as well, we've launched our Annicast, our podcast with Anne Stanley. I've just sent you the link. It's really good to listen to if you're at the gym or just in the kitchen, wherever, but it's all on Spotify. So I've just put that out to you all. So, and just next week, Zach, who's one of our senior account managers, will be talking about content. And that will be coming out really soon. So keep an eye on that one, because I think if you watch this today, some of the things that Katie's covered would definitely, link into that. So, yeah, I think that's it. Well done, Katie.
Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. And I hope you all found it useful in some capacity. I really enjoyed putting it together. And hopefully I'll be back for another one at some point soon.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Katie. And this will come out by about 12:30 today, usually on a Friday. That's what happens. So if I've missed any of your questions, I'm sorry. I think I've done quite well. So
thanks for all your feedback, everyone. I really appreciate it. Well, we've got another question quickly, Katie. So do you know any journalist community that we can look up? I think there are Facebook groups of various journalists. I would look at I can never say this, Response Source. That's a really good website I would look at. They offer sort of a service where you can sign up to, and journalists will email you directly, which is really, really beneficial based on.
I used to find Twitter quite good as well, Katie, just for like journo request, just as a hashtag, just to search for.
Yeah, journo request. That's a really good one. Yeah, so literally hashtag journo requests on Twitter. There'll be floods of different journalist requests essentially. So you can find people that way. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Katie and Katie. It sounds like a doesn't it?
Yeah.
I appreciate all the love emojis as well.
Well, we'll be seeing you all next week, hopefully. Enjoy, I don't know, like the rest of your Easter holidays, if that applies. Yeah. Oh, thank you. It's nice to get a bit of love. Please leave Katie a review if you can, because
I really appreciate your feedback, guys. And okay. Great. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Okay. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.